The Pacific Ocean was breathing slowly that evening. Long waves rolled toward the shore with a soft rhythm, like a giant heart beating far away beneath the water. The air smelled of salt and cool wind, and the sky above was slowly turning from gold to deep blue. David sat quietly on a piece of driftwood near the shore. He was a young man in his mid-twenties, with thoughtful eyes and a calm presence. For weeks, his mind had felt crowded with noise, deadlines, responsibilities, expectations. The world had begun to feel too loud. But the ocean. The ocean was different. The ocean never rushed, it simply moved. Wave after wave. Breath after breath, David watched the horizon where the sun was slowly disappearing into the water. The light spread across the surface of the ocean like soft liquid fire. Beside him rested a small wooden boat. It wasn't large or impressive. In fact, it looked almost humble. The paint had faded from years of sun and salt, and the ropes were worn smooth by time. But to David, the little boat felt like an invitation. A quiet one. The idea had come to him earlier that morning while he walked along the beach. What if he simply followed the waves for a while? No strict destination. No rush. Just the ocean. Just the journey. Sometimes the mind needs space to breathe, just like the sea needs room to move. The waves continued their gentle rhythm. Shoo, shoo. Almost like they were whispering something. David stood slowly and walked toward the boat. The sand felt cool beneath his bare feet. A soft breeze brushed past him, carrying the distant sound of seabirds settling for the evening. He placed his hand on the side of the boat. The wood was warm from the sun. Maybe, he said quietly to himself, it's time. Not time to escape. But time to drift. To let the ocean carry his thoughts somewhere quieter. The sky deepened into twilight as he pushed the boat gently into the water. The waves welcomed it easily, rocking it with a slow and patient motion. David climbed inside and untied the rope from the small post on the shore. For a moment, he paused. The beach behind him was peaceful. Familiar, safe. But the ocean ahead was wide and open, stretching farther than he could see. And yet, somehow, it didn't feel frightening. It felt calm. Like stepping into a dream that was already waiting. David took the oars and gently pushed them into the water. The boat moved forward. Slowly. Quietly. And as the shore began to drift farther away, the Pacific Ocean seemed to breathe a little deeper, welcoming a new traveler into its endless rhythm. The journey had begun. The shore slowly faded into the distance. At first, David could still see the line of sand and the dark shapes of palm trees resting against the evening sky. But little by little, the coastline softened and blurred, until it became only a shadow far behind him. The ocean stretched endlessly in every direction. Yet it didn't feel lonely. The Pacific was calm that night. The water moved with long, gentle waves that lifted David's small boat up and down in a slow rhythm. It felt almost like breathing. Up. And down. Up. And down. David rested the oars across the boat and allowed the current to guide him. Above him, the sky had transformed completely. The deep blue of twilight slowly gave way to a vast blanket of stars. One by one they appeared, quiet and patient, until the entire sky shimmered with soft light. Out here, far from the noise of cities, the stars looked brighter than David had ever seen. He leaned back against the wooden edge of the boat and looked up. For a while, he didn't think about anything at all. Just the stars. Just the waves. The water made its soft whispering sound against the sides of the boat. It was the kind of sound that slowly untangles thoughts. The wind was gentle, cool but comfortable. David pulled a light blanket from his bag and wrapped it loosely around his shoulders. The boat drifted quietly across the dark surface of the ocean. Somewhere far away, a whale exhaled. The sound was deep and peaceful, like a slow breath rising from the sea itself. David smiled faintly. The ocean felt alive in a calm, ancient way. Not busy. Not loud. Just quietly existing. He dipped his fingers into the water. The Pacific felt cool and smooth. Tiny ripples spread outward from his hand, catching the starlight for a moment before disappearing. For the first time in a long while, David noticed how quiet his mind had become. Back on land, thoughts would rush through his head constantly. What should I do next? What if something goes wrong? What should I worry about? But here, none of those questions felt important. The ocean didn't ask for answers. It simply carried him. A small glowing light suddenly appeared in the water beside the boat. Then another. And another. David leaned closer. Bioluminescent plankton drifted beneath the surface, tiny living lights floating in the dark water. When the waves moved, they shimmered softly like stars beneath the sea. The boat passed through them slowly, leaving a faint glowing trail behind. For a moment it looked as if David was sailing between two skies, one above him and one beneath him. The stars in the sky. The stars in the sea. He watched them quietly, feeling the gentle rocking of the boat. His eyelids began to grow heavy. The rhythm of the ocean had a way of slowing everything down, even time itself. David pulled the blanket closer and lay back carefully inside the boat. Above him, the Milky Way stretched across the sky like a silver river. The waves continued their endless lullaby. Up. And down. Up. And down. And somewhere between the stars and the sea, David slowly drifted into sleep, carried peacefully through the quiet heart of the Pacific Ocean. Morning arrived quietly on the Pacific. Before David opened his eyes, he could already feel the warmth of sunlight touching his face. The gentle rocking of the boat had never stopped through the night, and it had carried him into a deep, peaceful sleep. The ocean was still breathing slowly. Up. And down. Up. And down. David blinked awake. Above him stretched a clear sky painted in soft shades of early morning blue. The stars had disappeared, and the sun was slowly climbing higher, spreading golden light across the water. For a moment, David simply listened. The ocean sounded different in the morning. The waves were still calm, but now there were small sounds everywhere, the distant cry of seabirds. The quiet splash of fish beneath the surface, the soft creaking of the wooden boat drifting with the current. He sat up slowly and stretched his arms. The horizon surrounded him completely. Water in every direction. Endless blue. But instead of feeling lost, David felt strangely peaceful. The ocean did not feel empty. It felt wide and open, like a place where thoughts could stretch and breathe. He leaned over the side of the boat and looked down into the water. The Pacific was clear that morning, almost glass-like. Sunlight traveled deep beneath the surface, illuminating long dancing shapes of light that moved with the waves. Then something moved below. A smooth shadow passed silently under the boat. David remained very still. Another shadow appeared beside it. Then another. Suddenly, a dolphin leapt gracefully from the water several meters away. Its body arched through the sunlight before slipping back into the sea with barely a splash. David smiled. Soon more dolphins appeared, gliding effortlessly through the water around his boat. They moved together like a flowing dance, their bodies cutting through the waves with quiet elegance. One of them surfaced very close to him. For a brief moment, David felt as though the dolphin looked directly at him, curious, calm, almost friendly. Then it disappeared beneath the surface again. The small pod continued traveling beside the boat for several minutes, guiding it gently through the morning sea. Occasionally one would leap into the air, catching the sunlight before diving back into the water. The ocean seemed playful now. Alive. After a while, the dolphins slowly drifted away, vanishing into the endless blue. David watched until the last ripple faded. He reached into his small bag and took out a simple breakfast, some fruit, a piece of bread, and a bottle of fresh water. Sitting in the quiet boat, surrounded by nothing but ocean and sky, the meal felt surprisingly satisfying. Sometimes the simplest things taste better when the world is quiet. A soft breeze began to move across the surface of the water. The boat turned gently with the current, continuing its slow journey across the Pacific. David noticed something far away on the horizon. At first it looked like a cloud. But clouds do not sit so low on the water. He shaded his eyes and looked again. A small island. Just a faint green shape rising from the sea. David felt a calm curiosity growing inside him. He had not planned any destination when he left the shore. And yet the ocean seemed to be guiding him somewhere. The waves continued their patient rhythm. Slow. Steady. As if they already knew the path ahead. David rested his hands on the sides of the boat and allowed the current to carry him toward the distant island. The journey was only beginning. The island grew slowly larger as the morning passed. At first it had been nothing more than a distant shape on the horizon. But as David drifted closer, details began to appear, dark rocks rising from the water, soft green trees swaying gently in the wind, and a quiet stretch of pale sand resting between them. The ocean remained calm. The waves rolled slowly beneath the boat, guiding David closer to the island as if they had planned this meeting all along. He picked up the oars and rowed gently. Not fast. Just enough to guide the boat safely through the water. The closer he came, the more peaceful the island looked. There were no signs of buildings or people. Only nature, untouched and quiet. Seabirds circled lazily above the trees. Their calls echoed softly through the warm morning air. Soon the bottom of the ocean became visible beneath the boat. The deep blue water slowly turned into a lighter turquoise, revealing smooth stones and coral resting beneath the surface. David slowed his rowing. The water here was so clear that sunlight painted bright patterns across the sandy ocean floor. Small fish moved like flashes of silver beneath the boat. The island seemed to welcome him gently. When the boat finally reached the shore, a small wave carried it softly onto the sand. Shoo! The sound was soft and patient. David stepped out of the boat, his feet sinking slightly into the warm sand. After the quiet drifting of the ocean, standing still on land felt a little strange, like waking up from a long dream. The air on the island smelled different. Fresh. Warm. A mixture of salt, leaves, and sunlight. David pulled the boat a little farther onto the shore and secured it loosely to a smooth rock. Then he turned to look around. Tall palm trees leaned over the beach, their long leaves moving gently in the breeze. The sound they made was soft and relaxing, like the quiet rustling of paper. Farther inland, the island rose slightly into a small hill covered with dense green plants. Everything felt calm. Unhurried. David began walking slowly along the beach. His footsteps left temporary marks in the sand that the waves erased moments later. The ocean continued its endless rhythm, rolling in and out as if breathing peacefully beside him. Shoo, shoo. He walked without thinking about where he was going. Sometimes wandering without a plan reveals the most beautiful places. After a short time, David discovered a small tide pool formed between several large rocks. Inside it, tiny worlds were quietly living. Small crabs moved carefully along the stones. Bright starfish rested motionless beneath the water. Tiny fish darted back and forth like quick flashes of color. David crouched beside the pool and watched them for a while. Life in the ocean had its own rhythm. Not rushed. Not worried. Just existing. A gentle breeze moved through the palm trees behind him, and for a moment the leaves rustled in a way that almost sounded like whispering. David stood and looked toward the center of the island. Something about the place felt special. Not mysterious in a frightening way, but peaceful. Almost like the island was quietly telling its own story to anyone patient enough to listen. He decided to explore a little farther. With calm steps and an open mind, David walked toward the shade of the tall trees, leaving the bright beach behind him. And somewhere behind him, the Pacific Ocean continued its slow, steady breathing. Waiting. Always waiting. The shade beneath the palm trees felt cool and peaceful. As David walked deeper into the island, the sounds of the ocean slowly softened behind him. In their place came quieter sounds, the gentle rustling of leaves, the distant call of birds, and the soft movement of wind through the branches. Sunlight filtered through the tall palms above, creating shifting patterns of light on the ground. Everything felt calm. The path ahead wasn't really a path at all. It was simply a natural opening between plants and trees, as if the island had quietly made space for wandering travelers. David moved slowly. There was no need to rush. Every few steps he noticed something new, a bright flower growing between smooth stones. A small lizard resting in the sunlight, or a butterfly drifting lazily through the warm air. The island felt alive, but in a gentle way. After walking for a while, David began to hear something unexpected. Water. Not the ocean. This sound was softer, like a quiet trickle flowing over stone. Curious, he followed the sound. The trees slowly opened into a small clearing, and there in the center of the island he discovered something beautiful. A hidden lagoon. The water was perfectly still, surrounded by smooth rocks and tall green plants. A small stream flowed gently into it from a natural spring higher up the hill. The surface of the lagoon reflected the sky like a mirror. Blue above. Blue below. David stepped closer and knelt beside the water. It was clear, so clear he could see the smooth stones resting on the bottom. Tiny fish moved lazily through the calm water, undisturbed by his presence. He dipped his hand into the lagoon. The water was cool and refreshing. A soft breeze passed through the clearing, causing small ripples to move across the lagoon's surface. The reflected sky shimmered and danced for a moment before becoming still again. David sat on a warm rock nearby. Something about this place felt deeply peaceful. As if the island had been quietly holding this little lagoon for years, waiting for someone to discover it. The breeze moved through the trees again. The leaves whispered softly. For a while, David simply sat and listened. No thoughts. No plans. Just the quiet rhythm of nature. Eventually he lay back on the smooth rock, feeling the warmth of the sun on his skin while the shade of the nearby trees kept the air comfortable. Above him, the sky moved slowly as clouds drifted by. Time felt different here. Slower. Gentler. The kind of time that allows the mind to rest. David closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the soft trickle of the spring feeding the lagoon. It sounded almost like a quiet lullaby. And as he rested there in the peaceful heart of the island, David felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Complete calm. The ocean had carried him here. But perhaps the island had been waiting for him all along. The day passed quietly on the island. David spent the afternoon resting beside the hidden lagoon, listening to the soft trickle of water and the gentle movement of leaves in the wind. Sometimes he watched the small fish gliding through the clear lagoon. Sometimes he simply closed his eyes and breathed slowly. There was no hurry. The island seemed to exist outside the busy world. But eventually, the light began to change. The sun slowly moved lower in the sky, and the warm afternoon colors softened into the golden glow of evening. Long shadows stretched across the clearing, and the air became cooler and calmer. David stood and took one last look at the peaceful lagoon. The water reflected the orange sky now, glowing softly between the rocks and plants. "Thank you," he said quietly, though no one was there. Or perhaps the island itself was listening. He walked slowly back through the trees, following the same open spaces that had guided him earlier. Soon the sound of the ocean returned, the familiar breathing of the waves rolling gently onto the shore. Shoo, shoo. When David reached the beach again, the sight before him was beautiful. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly into the distance, glowing under the warm light of the setting sun. The surface of the water shimmered like liquid gold. His small boat waited where he had left it, resting peacefully on the sand. The ocean looked calm. Inviting. David untied the rope from the rock and pushed the boat slowly back into the water. A small wave welcomed it gently, rocking it with a familiar motion. He climbed inside and sat quietly for a moment. Behind him, the island stood peaceful and silent, its trees swaying softly in the evening breeze. Ahead of him, the open ocean waited once more. David picked up the oars and began rowing slowly away from the shore. Not far. Just enough for the island to become smaller behind him. Soon he allowed the current to take over again, letting the ocean guide his path. The sun touched the horizon. For a moment the entire sea seemed to glow with deep shades of orange, pink, and soft purple. Clouds above reflected the colors like brushstrokes across the sky. It was the kind of sunset that made the world feel quiet, almost sacred. David watched until the sun slowly slipped beneath the water. As darkness returned, the first stars appeared again. One by one. The wind remained gentle, and the waves continued their slow rhythm beneath the boat. Up. And down. Up. And down. David wrapped his blanket around his shoulders once more. The island had given him rest. But the ocean still had more stories to share. The Pacific stretched endlessly beneath the night sky, carrying him farther into its quiet, ancient rhythm. And somewhere out there in the dark water, something large and graceful was moving beneath the waves. Something peaceful. Something ancient. Something that had traveled these oceans for a very long time. But David did not know that yet. For now, the boat drifted softly under the stars. And the journey continued. The night ocean was calm and deep. David drifted quietly beneath the stars, wrapped in his blanket while the small boat moved slowly with the rhythm of the waves. The sky above was clear, filled with countless tiny lights that shimmered like distant lanterns. The Pacific breathed slowly. Up. And down. Up. And down. The air felt cool and peaceful. For a long time, nothing disturbed the stillness except the soft sound of water touching the sides of the boat. Shoo, shoo. David gazed up at the stars, letting his thoughts drift just like the boat. Then something changed. A deep sound rose from the water nearby. Whoosh. It was the sound of a powerful breath, slow and steady. David sat up gently. The ocean around him remained calm, but a few meters away the surface rippled softly. For a moment everything was quiet again. Then it happened once more. Whoosh. A tall mist of water rose briefly into the air before falling back into the sea. David knew that sound. A whale. He remained still, not wanting to disturb the quiet moment. The ocean surface moved again, and slowly, very slowly, a massive dark shape appeared beside the boat. A humpback whale. Its body rose gracefully from the water like a moving island of shadow and moonlight. The whale's back glistened softly under the stars before it slipped beneath the surface again. The boat rocked gently as the water moved around the giant creature. But there was no fear. Only calm. Moments later, the whale surfaced again, this time a little farther away. Its long fin lifted briefly above the water before sinking back into the dark sea. The whale moved slowly, peacefully, like a traveler following the ancient paths of the ocean. David felt very small beside such a creature. But not in a lonely way. In a peaceful way. As if he had been allowed to share the ocean for a moment with something truly ancient. The whale circled the area slowly. Every few minutes it rose to breathe, releasing another soft burst of mist into the cool night air. Whoosh! The sound echoed gently across the water. For a while, the whale and the small boat drifted together beneath the stars. Two travelers. One large. One small. Both carried by the same endless ocean. Eventually the whale began to move farther away. Its powerful tail lifted slowly above the surface, wide and graceful, before slipping back into the sea. The water grew still again. Only the quiet waves remained. David watched the dark water where the whale had disappeared. Somewhere beneath the surface, the gentle giant continued its journey through the Pacific. And now David continued his. He leaned back once more, feeling the boat rock slowly beneath him. The ocean had a way of reminding him of something simple. The world was vast. And yet, every traveler shared the same water, the same sky. The same quiet rhythm of the waves. The stars continued to glow softly above. And little by little, David drifted back toward sleep, carried peacefully across the endless night sea. Morning arrived softly over the Pacific. Before the sun appeared, a gentle silver mist rested on the surface of the ocean. It floated low above the water, thin and quiet, like a soft blanket covering the sea. David slowly opened his eyes. For a moment he didn't know where he was. All around him was a pale glow of light gray mist. The horizon had disappeared completely, and the world felt smaller and calmer, as if the ocean itself had become a quiet room. The boat rocked gently. Up. And down. Up. And down. David sat up and wrapped the blanket loosely around his shoulders. The air felt cool and fresh, carrying the faint smell of salt and distant water. The mist moved slowly with the breeze. Sometimes it grew thinner, allowing small glimpses of the ocean beyond. Other times it thickened again, turning the world into soft shapes and quiet shadows. It was peaceful. Very peaceful. David dipped his hand into the water beside the boat. The ocean felt smooth and calm, almost like glass beneath the mist. Small ripples spread outward from his fingers before fading quietly into the stillness. Somewhere nearby, a seabird called. Its voice echoed softly through the fog before fading away again. David listened carefully. In the quiet morning air, every sound felt clearer, the gentle movement of water, the faint flutter of wings, even the soft creak of the wooden boat drifting with the current. It felt like the ocean was waking up slowly. Little by little, the mist began to glow with a warm light. The sun was rising behind it. At first the light was pale and gentle, turning the fog into soft shades of gold and silver. Then the brightness slowly grew stronger. The mist began to lift. Thin ribbons of fog drifted across the surface of the sea, revealing patches of deep blue water beneath them. David watched quietly. The transformation felt almost magical. Soon the sun finally appeared above the horizon, and its warm light spread across the ocean once again. The remaining mist dissolved slowly into the sky, leaving behind a calm and endless blue sea. The world had returned. Bright. Open. Peaceful. A group of flying fish suddenly burst from the water beside the boat, gliding across the surface like silver arrows before disappearing again beneath the waves. David laughed softly. The ocean always seemed full of small surprises. He reached into his bag for breakfast and ate slowly while watching the morning light dance across the water. Far away in the distance, the ocean sparkled like thousands of tiny mirrors. The breeze returned gently, guiding the boat forward once more. No map. No hurry. Just the quiet guidance of the waves. David leaned back and looked at the wide sky above him. Somewhere ahead, the Pacific still held more stories. And the journey continued. Calm and unhurried, across the endless blue. The sun climbed higher into the sky as the morning slowly turned into afternoon. The Pacific Ocean stretched wide and endless around David's small boat. The water moved gently beneath him, rolling in long, calm waves that sparkled under the bright sunlight. Up. And down. Up. And down. The rhythm had become familiar now. After several days on the ocean, David no longer felt like a visitor. Instead, it felt as if he had slowly become part of the quiet rhythm of the sea. He moved when the waves moved. He rested when the ocean rested. There was something comforting about that. David sat at the front of the boat with his feet resting lightly against the wooden boards. A soft breeze brushed across the surface of the water, cooling the warm afternoon air. Clouds drifted slowly above him, moving lazily across the blue sky. Time felt different here. Back on land, time often felt fast, hours passing quickly, days filled with plans, schedules, and endless small worries. But here on the ocean, time moved like the waves. Slow. Steady. Peaceful. David watched the water carefully. Sunlight created dancing patterns beneath the surface, shifting and changing with every movement of the sea. Sometimes small fish passed below the boat like flashes of silver light. The ocean felt alive. Not in a loud way, but in a calm, patient way. For a long while David simply sat and thought quietly. When he first left the shore, his mind had been full of questions. What should I do next? Where am I going? What am I searching for? But now those questions seemed less important. The journey itself had become the answer. The ocean had shown him something simple. Sometimes people spend too much time trying to control every step of their lives. They try to decide everything in advance, worrying about the future before it even arrives. But the waves did not worry. They simply moved forward. One wave at a time. David realized that maybe life could be like that too. You don't always need to see the entire journey. Sometimes it is enough to follow the next gentle wave. The thought made him smile. He leaned back and closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the soft sounds of the ocean around him. The wind. The water. The slow creak of the boat. Everything moved together like a quiet song. Far away, the sun slowly began to lower toward the horizon once again. Another evening was coming. Another peaceful night on the ocean. And somewhere beyond the horizon, the shoreline of the world was waiting. But David no longer felt rushed to reach it. For now, drifting with the waves was exactly where he needed to be. The final morning arrived quietly. The ocean was calm once again, its wide surface glowing softly under the early sunlight. David woke to the familiar rhythm of the waves rocking the small wooden boat. Up and down. Up and down. For several peaceful moments, he simply lay there, listening. The ocean had become a kind of teacher during his journey. It had never spoken with words, yet it had shared many quiet lessons. Patience. Stillness. Trust in the slow movement of time. David sat up and looked toward the horizon. At first he thought he was imagining it, but as the morning light grew brighter, he could clearly see a faint dark line far in the distance. Land. Another shoreline waiting beyond the sea. The sight did not surprise him. In a way, he had known the journey would bring him somewhere eventually. The ocean had carried him gently forward every day, wave after wave, until now. But David did not feel rushed to reach it. Instead, he took a moment to look around. The Pacific stretched endlessly behind him, shimmering under the sunlight like a living mirror. The sky above was wide and clear, and a few seabirds glided silently through the morning air. Everything felt calm, peaceful, familiar. He picked up the oars and dipped them slowly into the water. Splash! The boat began to move forward again. Row by row, David guided the small boat toward the distant shore. The journey was quiet, just like all the days before it. As he moved closer, he could see more details: the shape of hills rising beyond the beach, trees swaying gently in the wind, and waves rolling lazily toward the sand. It looked peaceful. But David realized something important. The peace he felt no longer came only from the ocean. It came from inside him. The waves had shown him that calm was not something you had to search for far away. Sometimes it was something you carried within yourself, something that grew when you slowed down and listened. The boat continued forward. The shoreline slowly grew larger. Soon the water beneath the boat became shallow and clear. And the gentle waves carried him the last few meters toward the sand. Shoo! The boat touched the shore softly. David stepped out onto the beach. The sand felt warm beneath his feet, and the breeze moved gently through the nearby trees. For a moment he turned back and looked at the ocean. The Pacific was vast and endless, its surface moving slowly under the morning sun. Somewhere far beyond the horizon, the waves continued their quiet journey. Up and down. Up and down. David smiled. He knew that one day he might return to the ocean again. But even if he didn't, the calm rhythm of the waves would stay with him. Because the ocean was no longer only a place. It had become a feeling. A quiet rhythm. A gentle reminder that life, like the sea, moves best when we allow it to flow naturally. David took a slow breath of the fresh morning air. Then he turned and began walking along the peaceful shoreline, carrying the calm of the Pacific Ocean within him. And somewhere behind him, the waves continued their endless song.